individual subject level ROIs. Basically, you want an ROI that's in some sort of template space. And I think for cortical ROIs right now, it's definitely better to do that as like surface, not volume wise, just surface wise.
Right. But this data set that we are talking about, we don't believe that the field maps are doing any good job, or we cannot trust them. So we don't quite trust the level of correlation between the functional and anatomical. So for that, I think it's best to just focus on M&I space type of ROIs, which don't require any sort of free surfer analysis, and which implicitly require a good correlation between the functional and the structural.
Great. That definitely feels a lot safer to me. So yeah, I'd be really interested in doing it.
And for the M&I space ROIs, I don't know what we have. I mean, what do you think is best to use? We have like the Harvard Oxford Atlas, but we have a number of atlases in M&I space. So what do you think is best for us to
I honestly think that if you're going, maybe we should, as usual, let's test it and find out. But my suspicion is that if you're going to do AAL Atlas ROIs, that I don't know how much you're gaining on that, doing that. I'd be curious to know if we were to take our free surfer parcellation, those labels, and put them in the volume, even though the co-registration would be off, if that would be any worse than doing the AAL Atlas ROIs.
I guess this is like a really naive question because I'm still wrapping my head around this, but we have, and I know this is in the surface, but we have sort of a speech network that's defined. Can you essentially, I don't know, make a sphere around that and look at that in the volume, or you have to really have the surface to have that sort of distinction?
Well, that's a good question. And we do have a volume. So I think this is what Jason was mentioning before, that when you have ROIs that are defined on a surface, you can actually create somehow like a made up volume in 3D space with whatever 3D representation you have of that surface, and map those labels basically onto the volume that way. And we have done that using, I think, FS average representation basically of where the cortical ribbon is, to map our speech surface-based ROIs into an M&I space volume. The only thing is that the only thing that doesn't look quite right typically is that the cortical ribbon is still very thin on that representation, so that is going to look at a very small subset of voxels depending on how well they align to the actual location of the cortical ribbon in FS average space, in M&I space. That selection is going to be a bit arbitrary. So what I would do basically is to fill in using minimum distance or something like that, to fill in those same labels to neighboring voxels, so that other regions within the M&I space that are relatively close to the cortical ribbon in FS average space for that particular region would also be labeled and included within that ROI. So in that sense, that would be a reasonable way to expand basically a surface-based ROI into M&I space.
Okay.
And one of the things that you get, though, if you're taking the surface and then you're mapping it into the individual subject's volume, because that's what Free Surfer can do.
Right.
Then that's not a surface reconstruction. That's the actual
same voxels that you would get for
volume. So what it does is it says, okay, here's the surface. I map that into the volume. I'm intersecting with I'm intersecting with voxels. If I want to label that voxel, and then the other ones that are adjacent, like grow that from the white matter surface out to the peel surface, I'm going to just populate all those voxels and give it that label that was associated with the one that was at the white matter surface, that intersected with the white matter surface labeled region. So that is going to take care of some of the warp, the issue that we have with trying to co-register the functional and the structural. And again, for many years we did this without doing any kind of unwarping. I mean, our fields weren't as high, so the distortion probably wasn't as big as it can get now. But I would say if you're going to do ROIs of the cortex, because the cortex, it's not like the subcortical structures where, when we do these normalizations, we sort of like we often will be having like a start point that's kind of near, say, the anterior part of the thalamus, and then another point that's at the posterior part. So those areas are, one, closer to the origin, and two, they're not nearly as variable in terms of where they are in space, their extents, as these cortical areas. So my argument would be either just do the voxel or vertex-wise analysis for the cortical areas and skip the ROIs, or try to do either what I'm talking about. I mean, I think we need FL we'd have to be able to use individual ROIs, or we have at one point I took the MNI 152 volume, which is a much better match to any individual's brain is a much better match to that than the MNI 305 still a better match. What's it free surfer? I could go back to the MNI 305 one, but anyway, the MNI 152, that template looks like a brain. Mm-hmm. That's labeled I have that somewhere. And if you wanted to use a template-based label system, we could use that. So that's basically just taking the MNI 152 cortex and labeling the volume like we're expecting it to look. So, and
the labeling is for our speech ROIs, or is for the whole brain?
It's for our entire speech lab parcellation.
Cool.
But I still think I still would say if we could somehow build in the these other tool, the ability to use individual ROIs, that would be better. So,
right. So there are currently like 4 level of approaches, I guess, that we could use. I mean, and they go from trusting more the anatomical co-registration, the anatomical functional co-registration, to trusting it less. So in the more trusting section, it would be just running the actual surface-based ROI. So we have free surfer generate the labeling of the subject-specific anatomical data, and we assign that, basically use the free surfer our speech ROIs in free surfer space, in FS average space, to extract data from, and that is already implemented. You can use that, but that requires a good level of correlation between the structural and functional to be able to trust that, because it's using the free surfer generated anatomy and extracting voxels exactly from the cortical ribbon at those locations. So you want to make sure that those same voxels in the functional data actually correspond to the cortical ribbon in there as well. In the slightly less trusty approach, but still using free surfer generated information, would be what Jason was mentioning before. So perhaps what we could do is basically build that from free surfer labeling of that surface, convert that into a volume, and then do some sort of nearest neighbor to extrapolate the region, so that we are not extracting only from the cortical the voxels that we believe are cortical ribbon, but also from somehow nearby voxels as well, to construct our ROI level data, basically for each particular speech ROI, also from the free surfer information. So just like extrapolating that same free surfer information that is specific to every individual subject, to be a little bit more robust to miss specifications. Then a third level would be to use something like this, converting our, again, free surfer ROIs, so surface level ROI, speech ROIs, into MNI space, and using the data in MNI space to extract from those locations, and again using the nearby kind of like extension of regions to also extract from regions that may be relatively close to what we expect a particular region to be. But and that basically doesn't require free surfer running our data through free surfer, and doesn't require knowing basically or trusting the correlation between free surfer individual subject anatomical data and the corresponding individual subject functional data. And then the last portion is, sorry, I didn't hear.
But that's like a surface-based template.
Right, it would be like using a surface-based template, but in M&I space, converting it to M&I space, and then using the functional data in M&I space to extract from those locations. And then last but not would be just forgetting about free surfer ROIs at all, and then just using M&I-based ROIs, either from the anatomical, from coordinates basically, or from an atlas, like an M&I space defined atlas, and that's kind of like the other stream. So those, among those four, well, all of those four approaches are actually can be used in FL currently. The second and third would require a little bit of manual work to actually construct those ROIs. The third approach, we have these ROIs defined already in the M&I 152 space that Jason was mentioning. So that wouldn't require any work. I don't know if those ROIs are already extended a little bit as well to cover for regions that are nearby, or they are exactly in the cortical ribbon of that M&I space 152. Jason.
They are. It's basically what it is taking the M&I 152, running free surfer's recon process,
right?
Labeling the surface, correcting it, and then mapping those into the free surfer cortical ribbon. So they'll be tight.
Right.
And right now they're in it's a single volume that's labeled. But it's easy to extract the individual labels from that. And I should say, I believe that I've mapped it into the volume. If not, it's trivially easy to do that, and then we can generate the labels. But again, for any given brain, anytime you're using one of these atlases, I don't know, so the idea of using an atlas over the individual labels, because these are all run through FreeSurfer, they're all labeled already. The advantage of using the template would be to overcome problems with the code registration. But I don't know how big a factor that is compared to the inaccuracy you get that you're using a template to label it rather than the actual individual brain, where something like the central sulcus, FreeSurfer can find that just about every time. And these other surrounding ROIs, you're going to, if the goal is to match like anatomical regions, I would still say that even so long as you're going into the volume, we check to make sure there's not some major problem, the accuracy of that would still be better than the accuracy of a template. But I guess, Alfonso, that's a debate, right?
So what you are saying is that you expect the approach 2 basically to work better than approach number 3, because the inaccuracies in the correlation are always going to be less than the residual anatomical variability across subjects compared to an atlas after normalization.
Right. So long as there doesn't seem like there's some catastrophic failure in the surfaces themselves or the code registration.
Right, and we can always extend the surfaces. Even in approach 2, we can still extend those ROI labels to cover a little bit beyond what we believe to be exactly the cortical ribbon, just to make sure that we are being a little bit more robust to anatomical.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Nice that.
In fact, there used to be, and I've tried to find this on a few different occasions and can't, but at one point there was a way you could run FreeSurfer so that you basically would allow the peel surface to be farther out along the cortex. So in order to make FreeSurfer work as well as it does, this is my theory. They purposely have the peel surface not really be at the exterior of the brain. It's really, they'll say it's like really kind of like at a midpoint, and they'll make some arguments that it doesn't matter, that I think especially when the voxel sizes were bigger, it's still going to, most of the cortex would be included in there. But now that the voxel sizes are smaller, you do lose, even on the best recon, you are eliminating some cortical voxels by design. And at one point, there was a parameter in FreeSurfer where you could say, okay, if the white matter is here and I'm going to march out, so that's what it does. It gets the white matter surface, gray-white surface, then it marches out perpendicularly to some threshold, some change, some distance, some change in intensity, and it says I'm going to stop there. You can make it so that it would stop a little farther away. So I don't know. I
Right.
don't know if we
And
want to
there's
mess with that for this, but maybe we could just automatically do that.
right. There's one parameter as well in the extraction itself. When we are actually extracting voxels from functional data, basically from a particular location in the cortical surface, that actually uses the same information. It uses like the voxel, the location in the data space of the PL surface and the location of the voxel that would be in the white matter white matter gray matter boundary, and it kind of like average basically the data within that line, basically to get the cortical ribbon. But you can actually extend that further or constrain to only get it within the middle of it, and you could basically change that width kind of parameter also at the extraction level. So once free surfer generates the expected cortical ribbon, you can actually decide how long along the perpendicular line to extract from, and exactly where to extract from, whether you just trust the center of that or you trust the whole region, or you want to even go beyond that. So perhaps that could be another place where we could also add this kind of like extension. I don't know. So perhaps all of this speaks about that we need to kind of like play a little bit with this and see what gives us more robust results in general.
Yeah, and I think, looking at, where I am and ready for that part, I think once we sort of get this up and going, mine would be a really good one to compare 2 and 3, because it's a non-ideal data set.
Right, which is more realistic.
It's sort of like we can see at that level, and we have all the free surfaces for individual subjects made already. So all those have to be done is changed into a volume and then mapped and extracted, and then theoretically it should be relatively easy to compare the output from that and using the M&I space 152. So we're still using the speech lab ROI, but it's either from a template or from an individual.
Maybe a first thing to do would be to use just like, well, we could use 152. I think that if we're going to do a test, it might be interesting to look at the AAL outlets and just see like if stuff pops up with this out of the can, widely used atlas. We could look at that. We could do that.
Yeah.
That would at least answer.
Right, and also for subcortical regions, do you have a preferred like a standard M&I space atlas, Jason?
Well, we have AAL that we could use.
AAL also.
I think I would rather use the free surfer segmented regions if we're going to do something at that level. The AL atlas level, which is basically like all of thalamus, all of putamen, all of pallidum. But we also have this other probabilistic atlas of subcomponents of those subcortical structures that we can use.
Cool. I also already added the option to use probabilistic atlases. So instead of using .ROIs in the FL syntax, just use .WROIs for weighted ROIs. And that allows you to use probabilistic atlases kind of like with using the same pretty much syntax format.
So then for that, you would specify the whole atlas file, and then each ROI within the atlas would be a separate ROI?
Right. It expects you to have like a probabilistic atlas information. So basically for every individual region, which can come in a different file or within the same 4D file, it expects to have for every voxel value, and it's going to use that value as a weight for doing the weighted average computation of the ball signal or the effects within the ROI across basically by averaging across all of the voxels. So basically that works for either having separate files for each file, having this weighted distribution, this weight probability distribution of each ROI, or having a 4D volume that basically a single 4D atlas file that has multiple volumes, one per ROI, that each ROI again has the probabilistic values. And the reason why the standard atlas doesn't work in that sense, the single 3D file, is because you can have basically overlap between different ROIs at a given voxel, where the probability might be non-zero for 2 different ROIs. So you need to have basically one map per ROI. Make sense?
Yeah.
For these studies, what we really should think about though is, should we push for publishing and then do the testing rather than hold off?
Yeah.
you know, because there's a ton of testing that we can do. And, you know, and Alfonso and I we like doing that. So it's important for people to fight that urge.
Yeah.
And see if we
Yeah,
can,
that's totally true. When I'm talking about we should try this out and try this out, that doesn't mean that your experiment needs to actually wait for us to do all of these tries. We could use your experiment data to try many of these scenarios, but just for the purpose of your actual analysis, let's decide a priori which one is the ROIs that we want to use, which approach makes more sense. I mean, given this variety of approaches and what we can expect, I mean, at least in reasonable sense, to be the expected sensitivity of each approach to different things, right? And let's go for one.
From that point of view, what's the main benefit to doing 3/4, like our speech lab ROIs versus an atlas? If we're thinking about,
well, our speech ROIs are very nicely defined in terms of the functionality of speech-related tasks, right? So that many of the common atlases that you have there basically lump things together in ways that might not be as meaningful to us, basically.
Yeah. And all of these. Oh, I'm sorry, Alfonso.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I guess for ACE, I believe that even the actual individual volume labels are there, because I think they were used for doing some of the DTI stuff.
yeah,
The original first pass DTI stuff.
for the individual subjects.
I believe so. But so then it just comes down to Alfonso. What would it take to be able to do the individual ROIs?
The number 2 approach.
In FL, because I mean, ultimately, I think we want that in there.
Right. No, that is going to be.
Stuff.
I just started working pretty much today, so there is going to be one extra day of adding some stuff, and we'll have the subject-specific stuff. That's simple.
Okay. So the idea
would allow us to do number 2, right? That's what we're after here for this particular data set. So using and I'll figure out also how to extend it. Basically, well, I don't know. Do you have any a priori recommendations on what do you think might be the best approach to make this number 2 approach a little bit more robust to meet specifications? Should we just extend it like voxel-wise, like nearby voxels also to be used? Or should we do the projection onto the perpendicular to the gray matter kind of like direction and extend along that direction? Something different? We shouldn't extend at all and just use the subject-specific stuff as it is. What do you think?
Well, so if we map it back into the volume, are we smoothing at that point? So if there's some amount of smoothing, either in the volume or along the surface, maybe you don't need to do the extension. But
right, we could smooth the data itself. You mean, right?
Right. So if I guess what would be probably the thing to do would be to smooth only within the cortex, or I don't know. I guess.
I like that idea. Yeah, I think we can use the raw data itself for subject-specific ROIs and just smooth the data in different ways. We can try a couple of those. If anything, we could try the smoothing within the cortical ribbon itself, and then compare it with the smoothing just in general. To the first will be more accurate, the second will be more robust. So,
or you could we
prefer to use.
Sure. What if you extracted the individual ROI, the voxels of the individual ROI, and then smooth on that, and then your smoothing kernel would extend out a little bit, around past the edges. That I guess it's the same as smoothing the whole thing.
Right. It's just pretty much equivalent.
Yeah. All right. Well, ultimately, it's kind of going as a first step. It's going back to the SLT days, Alfonso.
Right. So this is kind of like option number 2. Let's smooth a little bit to try to make. If we had to make a bet and just choose a single approach for this particular experiment, which one we choose? And it seems like we are kind of like going towards option number 2 with smoothing the data a little bit just to correct for those distortions, so like residual distortions.
I guess I would say that would be my lean if we feel like we need to do cortical ROI analysis, and if that would be what I would say. Because it's actually not that much work on our end.
Right.
No, my end as well. So no worries.
Easy for us.
Right.
What's your rationale for doing cortical ROI? Other than something else to try.
There's something else to try. I'm still wrapping my head around it. I have a lot of variability in my data. I have a lot. And I do not currently have group differences. And I'm wondering if I was able to actually look over just specifically the speech network, because I'm getting a lot of visual stuff. I'm looking at, like, I have motion differences between the groups. And then also where things are lighting up more sort of frontal and back are different. So I'm curious if I narrow it down, because I have a bit of a power issue. So that's my main motivation. Yeah.
And I believe that those A-Park BG, those, I think there are a few ROIs that were manually corrected by Bobby.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I was just
and so that's something that we wouldn't want to. That's a very valuable piece of information there. So I think we want to take advantage of that. And in that study, we have specific hypotheses about which areas are going to be involved in the process. These medial and lateral, premotor, prefrontal areas. So I should look and confirm. I believe that we've done all those edits, and and that's even more reason I would say that we want to go with number 2 here, because we've actually done the correction.
So if all those edits are done, the best thing for me to do is figure out how to convert those into volume.
They may already be converted. We can check on that. Yeah, they may be converted, and then Alfonso, if you can just take the volume, like the single labeled volume, that would have all the cortical and subcortical ROIs defined in that,
like
research for A part plus ASEG kind of volume. That would be the easiest thing on our end. But if you would need those broken down into individual labels.
No, that works perfectly as a single atlas. The only thing that I need to make sure is that the data itself has also been reprocessed through the surface level pipeline, so that at least I have one particular version of the data that is co-registered in the same space, co-registered to the structural data where these ROIs have been defined, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So through the FL pipeline, you want a volume run and a surface run.
Right, because I'll need the surface run if we're going to be using this free surface generated ROIs to have at least one particular version of the functional data which is in the proper space, in this subject space being the actual space of the anatomical information, which is the anatomical structural file, which is the one that free surface used to generate, to put everything, but these ROIs in.
Great, yeah, I have that. I have both of those. The only thing that's different in the surface is I had gone back and tried to add in that extra level of smoothing that you had suggested, but the pipeline didn't. I forgot to email you about this, but I think I was doing something wrong, because the pipeline then, because it had an extra U in it, it couldn't find the next one, and it didn't run completely. So, but I do have the original one that we've done.
Okay, that's fine. And send me the error message and I'll figure it out. It should be fine. I mean, these pipelines, you can just add additional steps in the middle and it should work adapt all automatically. It shouldn't run into any issues, but just send me the error message and I'll double check.
Okay, great.
And yes, I'll send you basically this. I'm guessing tomorrow, most likely, just the syntax to use for subject-specific ROIs. And for that, you should be able to just to create a new second-level analysis that actually, ROI level analysis that actually uses those subject-specific ROIs and see how those work. So, Jason, this is totally unrelated thing, but I was actually checking today, looking at the co-registration issue with those subcortical masks, and I couldn't find that misco-registration in the data that I had, in the version of that mask that I have on my computer. So just to make sure that the problem was not that we had different versions, I uploaded back again into the Con Toolbox ROIs, other ROIs.
Okay.
So
it wasn't
so
much.
Look at that mask and check out how it was cropping a portion of the caudate, right? What was the issue originally?
The original one was cropping some of the caudate. I think there were some other smaller things too, but that was it. And so that you've corrected.
Well, I just looked visually at the version that I had on my computer, and I couldn't see that basically on the
so
on the
maybe,
mask. So perhaps this was a version issue, and I'll just put the same version that I had on my computer on the cluster just to make sure. And if you can look at that file, if you want, perhaps you can even look at it now if you want. I mean, just take a look at that file and see whether you still have the same issue or not. Because I was trying to figure out the source of the issue, but I couldn't even find the issue itself. So that stopped me.
So I think we were gonna look at some of Matt's data. So maybe Matt, do you have a VGL window? So could you just either take control of Matt's screen or walk him through loading that up? Because I wasn't even sure where to find the actual. I didn't actually look at the actual mask. I was looking at fairly thresholded results that seemed like we're still missing some pieces. And as I was talking with Matt, it may not be the mask. It may be the way that we're trying to combine the subjects. Where
I seem to recall that. I mean, this was a couple of weeks ago, but I seem to recall that when we found that, I look at the mask, and I also saw the same issue in the mask itself, and we were doing this basically online, so we were using the mask that is defined in the cluster itself. And the only problem was that I couldn't repeat the same thing. So that is what made me think that it was a problem with the mask itself, and then I tried to look at that further. I couldn't.
So
yeah, this is not yet.
Can we throw?
Share. It's not coming out.
Have you shared?
I shared. Should I unshare?
No, mine seems to go back to its. Do you have? You don't have an adapter location, do you? Sorry, we're just gonna. Actually, if I.
You can log in to it.
Let me just see if I can get it.
Well, maybe I can borrow Jason's.
So instead of adding, just one minor question, instead of adding, I think just for general recommendation, instead of adding all of those paths to your MATLAB session, typically add just a path to FL and then do type FL in it, because that will do some additional checking of the versions of the other software that you have, just to make sure that everything is the same stuff, basically. So you don't need to add all of the SPM and comp paths. That FL init will do that for you, and it will actually double check that those are the proper paths, because we try to make this basically consistent across whoever runs this software and the user, and they might have different configurations options and they might be using different SPM versions of things like that. We're trying to avoid that variability by having FL force the same version across all subjects, across all users.
Okay, so do you mind just, Alfonso, maybe you could grab control of Matt's.
Sure. So what is it that, let me see if I can request remote control. So what is it that we want to look at here in this?
First, do you want to just verify that the mask looks okay?
The mask? Okay, sure. Let's look at that then. Do we have like a com window in here? Let's see if I can. Oops, no, not yet. I cannot type. No. Yeah. So, what is the simplest way I can do this? I really need my glasses for this. This is really small. Sorry.
Is there a way to, Matt, is there a way for you to increase the,
It might be harder for Alfonso.
Oh, cool.
Does it make it worse?
This looks fine. It's going to make it difficult to browse, to move my mouse right across all of this. But anyway, let me check which one.
The danger, and that's the danger of having a really nice monitor. When it's laptop, crazy high resolution.
I was all like, that's a mess.
Can I see that email?
Come on.
Okay, so what you can, so there's the volume file.
Oh, it wasn't here. It was.
And
It was that. No, it's not. Okay, so I cannot see the bottom part of the screen now.
all the subjects, there's a repeat of all the subjects that have that done. I believe we've done it for all of them because I think Matthias, for his first pass, was doing volume-based ROIs.
Okay.
I think that's right. I think, so you can have that. So SL Park BG plus ESEG. You see that?
Okay, so Jason, can you take a look at this and see whether that ROI definition makes sense to you anatomically, or whether you see any like obvious mismatch between those two?
Can you click around a little bit?
Right. I mean, where do you want me to click?
I guess like kind of click around the mask itself.
Okay.
And then I'll see what yeah, that yeah. It looks. Yeah, I don't see any.
Okay, so let's try to use this mask then for the analysis themselves that were showing these kind of like holes, right? And see whether we actually find the same issue or not.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And do you recall, Matt, which analyses were those?
So it's this one here. M&I space with field map versus speech support.
Okay. And the mask has been already specified in the config file, right? So we should have something like.
What's that?
Just saw a different one for the same.
I think we're trying to determine that it's some updated version. SSH.
No, really. I'm running the service smoothly to see what my area is. So.
Does anybody have the command for connecting to the SEC with the particular VGL memorized?
With the one that you already have.
Or QVGL.
No, the SSH minus L thing. So you have to log in to SEC with a tunnel. It ends with like 777 : localhost : 5903. I don't have it on here.
So sorry again, which one was the name of the second level analysis that I could take a look at here for the config files? Sorry, I moved my directory and I'll change the ones that you were pointing to.
It's just subcortical, like speech subcortical. This one.
Speech subcortical mask. Okay, cool. So I may be misremembering something, but why I'm not finding it here, the speech subcortical config file for that?
The last two.
The speech baseline, oh, the baseline, speech baseline subcortical, okay. and this is using the test subcortical, which is something else. So let's change that. Okay. Then this. Baseline. Okay, I think that should work, but I don't see what I'm typing very much, so I might have some stuff that's going on. Let's see. Oops, what was that about?
What would be good to have is a remote where you could just stop and start the recording.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you can pause it.
Yeah, you can pause it. Can you pause it?
Could you make the a little bit bigger? I cannot. There is a lot of interpolation, and even with the glasses, I cannot see what the hell is saying. Thanks. Thank you. Let's see. So it's not fine. Oh, that was a check that I added recently, and that was a bad check. So let me just fix that. Access file.
Like malloc commands or something that they think up to like to view stuff. When it's sort of like just on the background.
What's that?
Like, I have that error. How did I get it?
Okay. Fix that. All right. Right, next try then. Oh, come on. 17, 17. I thought I had uploaded that. Check.
Importing videos.
All right, so let's try again. I think that was just, it didn't upload it.
So this is the APARC PG. These are actually one of our lumped versions, not the whole thing, which I think for these kids is probably better in terms of accuracy. So this will actually kind of compare. This will be, it's a little bit more of a, it's a higher resolution parcellation than something like the AAL Atlas, but it's not our full Parcellation. BG stands for Bobby Glowed, which was Bobby's last name when I first met her. And for some reason, so we had to set up this to do this parcellation. We set up this. Is he ready to go now? Okay.
Jason, you agree with
Yep. Yep.
So it's still showing that this is the thing that we were missing, right? This portion of it.
I mean, so admitted, you can see this gradation in the activation. So if you take the activation and make the cluster threshold, well, the cluster threshold doesn't really matter a whole lot, but if you make the voxel threshold as high as you can make it.
Well, it's already 0, so that's
Is it?
as high as you can make it in this case.
Oh, you can change that on here.
Well, but then, I mean, if I use a liberal enough threshold, so let me change that here basically to just use everything. All right. So we see
That's a good trick.
everything.
Trick that I could not figure out yesterday, how to make it so you see everything.
Right then. So basically I removed the threshold to the high threshold, but and now you can actually remove it here as well. It's an ugly thing. But anyway, you can make that a little bit transparent so that, let's see, overlay, image transparency. All right. So
if you go down, what you see is you get.
sorry, yeah,
that's all right. You have to go one at a time.
Right, and the delay is a bit too much. So
as you go down, I noticed that the two things. One, that you like the head of the caudate as you got more ventral. Just keep going down. Seemed to be worse. Although on the left side of the image here, it looks like it's the whole thing, right?
Right.
So it may just be that it's dropping. So it could just be that the caudate isn't useful for speech. A nice new finding. and then if you click on the sagittal image, and then look at the cerebellum, it looked like it was leaving some out, but it's not really leaving much out here. So I think it's fine. It's just that it's just the way, yeah.
Well, it is still, I mean, in the medial portion, but this is kind of like the most medial, so that might be a little.
Is there a reason why you leave the pons out?
Not on purpose. I think this mask was just.
This right here. So this is what.
Right.
That's not going to help him. But if you stop there, Alfonso, if see, it looks like the cerebellum's kind of displaced, basically.
Right. Yeah. That's weird. Okay, let me check the actual mask that we are using just to make sure that everything looks fine. So,
Caudate.
No, I'm more.
Yeah, caudate. Useless.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is of the index file.
Well, it's not manual edits. I think Bobby may have corrected a couple of these things, but to be honest with you, I'm now going back on that because
There's usually like another label after.
what I think happened is, well, I'll go into it later, but LSPSLRT. So see how these are.
Check something just in case.
Cut and pasted so the
Yep.
dates.
Yep. It's interesting. I thought that was then.
Yeah.
But these are probably just edited. So just take another random sample here.
Right, so the mask itself is leaving out a little bit of this, correct? Yeah.
No, I mean there it's not a whole lot.
Right. I mean, it's not as much as
So-
the
And, Alfonso, what's the source of this mask? Is it
right. If I recall correctly, this is a free surfer. Free surfer parcellation file, I think, or I
of the
don't
M&I
recall it.
35?
Yeah, the M&I space.
I mean, ultimately,
ROI atlas.
because we essentially run all these through FreeSurfer, we have a really
Right, we have the subject specific ROI, so those
mask.
are fine, right?
Right. So I don't know. We could, if we did a mask that was the union of all the individual subjects, or somehow I don't know how you'd limit it by the individual subject, but I guess you could do that. You could just do the union of all the masked voxels.
Right, I can just make this mask a little bit more liberal. I just want to make sure that well, I don't recall the procedure for generating this mask because I don't use them very much. It's just like in the list of other potential masks to be used in the com folder in there. So it's not one of the kind of like heavily used masks. So I don't know. I don't like that it's too conservative. I want to make sure that I redefine it, but for our purposes, for this particular analysis, for example, since we have, you're right, we have this mask already generated, well, at least we could easily create them, right, for every individual subject, which we could just create like something like the union of all of those to
Right.
have a rather liberal definition of those masks.
And I think the cerebellum piece, that would be a big plus to that, because that
right.
like any single subject, that the cerebellum could be, like if that's positioned differently, it's going to make a big difference here. Where
right, it has this kind of like
because it looked like it was grabbing a bunch of adjacent cortex.
Well, shouldn't as much. Let me make that.
If you go to the sagittal, if you go to the sagittal.
Right, like just 1 second. Let me make this transparent just so that we have the same kind of like view.
See there, it looks like it looks.
Well,
that looks fun. That looks different than what it looked like on
right
before. When is this the same template that was? So this is
right. It's exactly the same template. It's just different mask. So I'm trying to figure out. Let me see. Is this the same data that we were looking at before, or perhaps not?
This isn't the.
This isn't the same data that we were looking at before. So let me. Oops, again. Commercialize. Well, I can get it from this. Okay. So, let's avoid any bordering stuff. Okay. Let's make sagittal as well. Look at the cerebellum. Let's that make it a little bit transparent.
It's gonna take a second, actually.
Okay, so this is what doesn't look that right. Let's put this up here. let's see, what are we looking? 10, 10. Okay, so 10. So right hemisphere.
Should be close enough, I guess. No, it didn't work.
That is weird. Okay, so the masking, so then there is a problem with the masking itself, or the masking procedure. So perhaps this is actually a bug in the code, in the mask, in the way that we are implementing the masking, because the mask is assumed to be, that might be, mask is assumed to be in the same space as the multifunctional data. Perhaps we don't have the mask in the same space as the functional data. What is this mask space? Yeah, let me check that. Perhaps that is a problem. That the okay, that. Let's see.
So start with this. Oops.
Oh, this is not the same space. Okay, so that's the problem then. Okay, so this mask is not ready to be used for our pipeline, or I need to change the pipeline to use this mask, because it's basically the FL pipeline so far was assuming that the mask should be in the same space and resolution. Basically, for example, it's since this is mostly used for M&I space type of analysis, it was assuming that everything has been resampled to M&I space with the same resolution, and this one, since was probably generated from free server, is fine. It's co-registered to M&I space, but it's not resampled to the typical M&I space dimensions that SPM generates, which are these. I don't recall the numbers, but they are not 128 for every, or 256. It's going to be just 128 voxels for every dimension. They're going to be something like, let me see, something like this.
I think. I'm not sure exactly why these got called SL Park PG. I think it's just because I think it. I don't know. Well, why speculate? Why speculate? Why bother? But that seems like a good candidate. They're the larger ones. We do have the automatic SL average ones too. But when you do that, you then you can then take those. So if I do this,
Alfonso, when you're done with that, we were able to.
Yeah, I'm pretty much done with this. I think I figured out what the problem was. The problem is that this mask is actually in the same space, but it's not correlated to the same voxel size, and our scripts expect the voxel dimensions of the mask to be in the same, basically identical to the voxel dimensions of your data, and in this case, this mask wasn't. Basically, this has. So the data has probably this dimensionality 91 by 100 and something by 91, which is the typical M&I normalization result of to 2 millimeter isotropic voxels in SPM, and this mask contains this 128 by 1, like three-dimensional matrix again in 2 millimeter isotropic voxels, but just a different kind of like bounding box, and that is what is causing this miscorrelation. So I'll fix this by changing the FL pipeline itself, so that it can handle this type of scenarios of masks that are in different spaces. Well, in the same space, but in different dimensionality as the data. So I have to fix this. So I don't know, at least one mystery solved. This don't trust the mask result yet, because the mask hasn't been applied to the proper positions. Basically, it's probably close, but not exactly the same.
all right, cool.
So here's our second
So,
lister.
so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Will you just send me like a quick note email, like when it's okay for me to rerun it?
Right, I'll fix this even before the subject specific stuff, because it's relatively simple enough, and I'll send you everybody a note when that is ready to be used again.
Thank you.
Let me just share.
Oh, yes.
Unshare.
Anything else that we want to look at in this data, or
And that, yeah, we'll swing back to it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh my god. It looks like that one. I see red.
What's the picture of?
The Canadian Rockies.
It's a hell of a place to put a golf course.
There it is. Oh, I need to do it.
Oops.
Could you share your window, Elaine, if you don't mind? I think that.
Trying. 2 seconds. I think. So Alfonso, you're not seeing anything right now?
Oh, it's a screen share.
No, let me, perhaps I need to.
No, hold on. We have it.
No, that's fine. I mean, I see you through the video, but I just see that there's not much more.
Okay. So it should be sharing now, but it's very small.
I'm still seeing, let me see, what is it that I'm seeing?
Let me just
Oh,
switch
okay.
back my display so that it's mirrored because it's just easier for me to control than having to
Yeah.
Okay, what's up with the
I don't know. Something's up with
resolution?
it.
It's really wonky.
Because it looks fine on the screen.
Just maybe out of focus.
No, it's a resolution.
Give me 1 second.
No problem.
Why is everything tiny here now?
So, this is the white matter surface. This is the peel surface that FreeSurfer creates. It's that looks like this when you label it.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And then when you FreeSurfer will go and automatically segment gray white. So all the subcortical structures, and then white matter, gray matter, and then
You just tell them what I did here.
Can you
So-
see that now, Alfonso?
Well, Alfonso, I think you're muted.
So sorry, I was double checking. Yes, and now I see a MATLAB window on FL experiment.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
perfect.
this was when I tried to rerun the surface level analysis with the extra functional smoothing. I can open up the
Okay.
error that I got. Open up what I did. Oh, this is it. Oh,
there's a way to change the zoom.
this is what I ran.
Okay, and the change was basically adding the functional smooth thing
Yeah.
in there, right? Okay, that looks perfectly fine. And let me look at the error message then for a second. Okay, so it's doing its thing.
Sorry, hold on. Let me go all the way down here. There we go.
Oh, okay. Unable to write file, that thing. Huh. That's weird. And could you move to the right to see the end of that line that says unable to write file to that directory, the sort of permission denied. So perhaps they have like a prior version of the file that has been created by another user, and you don't have. So basically, this file that is called rp_sub something into that folder. Could you copy that whole file name just to see? Yeah, copy that and do an ls-l, but with the whole directory just to point to that same exact file. Try to
Yeah, I
figure out
have
why.
run this multiple times, so it's possible, but I didn't. It's
But
just
it's the same user, right? I mean, if you're creating it yourself, it shouldn't have a permission issue. right? And then just the name of the file.
Oh, that's a really good point. I did just run this on a lanes, but
Okay, so that might be it because it's right. It's an okay.
I
So
have to go through and update.
right, either delete it or add the right permission to the group, right, for that stuff. I'll see if I can add by default all of these right permissions because that should be part of the. I don't know why they are not created. I think at the end of the pipeline they change the right permissions to make sure that we.
But okay, I'll have to check on my computer because I definitely got this error when I was running it on mine, right? Because it was the same, and I was worried because it was at this same place. But I'll run it again and see because maybe it's just I'm conflating two things. But this makes sense.
Okay, this particular error is just like a permission issue with that file that from running it by different subjects and not having the right permissions to add it to the group. So that should be fixable. If you run it again in your computer without this scenario and you're still running into an error, just copy and paste the error message to me so I can take a closer look and see what it means.
Great. Okay, I'll check that again when I get back to that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So then once I get this run, I can point you to where this is, where my unwarp is in the volume, and then where the individual, Jason's looking at the individual subject parcellations.
Files that are having generated, perfect. And I'll just change the script so that it can take that subject specific definition of ROIs.
Should I point to those in the subject config files because they're in different places?
Right.
I could also put the what's it called, the path in each file, and then we can figure out what the hashtag is going to be.
Right, exactly. I haven't figured out come up with a way of specifying that information, but it's probably going to be simple to edit into the configuration file.
Okay, but we will probably have to point to those folders in the config file, so I might as well go through it.
And if you create a reasonable hashtag, I'll use that. So, so just let me know which one.
A lot of power, Alfonso.
Right. I mean, it has to be flexible to incorporate like a specification of individual ROIs or subject-specific ROIs. I don't know if we're going to be using like different hashtags for those two scenarios, or just the flexibility of just that having the scripts figured out depending on the number of. Well, I don't know. Perhaps the different names hashtags will be better because the number of ROIs might match exactly the number of subjects, and that might be just a coincidence, not from you wanting to actually enter a subject-specific ROI. So perhaps just trying to have the scripts being too smart might be a bad idea in this case. Okay,
Jason, when I point to a folder like that, when it's been like worked on in FreeSurfer, do I point to the whole MRI folder? Do I like at what level will it most likely be needing to reach different things? Or the whole subject folder, like?
You mean in terms of changing permission?
No. Let's just say that we're going to incorporate this into the pipeline. And so I'm going to say, here's where all the information you need is on the subject-specific ROIs.
So I would say if you're going to put in the pipeline, you for this thing specifically, you would say, you would point any experiment / or basically like subjects dir.
Right.
Everybody, people are familiar with that as free subjects dir / MRI / example name of the file.
Oh, I guess, okay. I'm just trying to figure out I guess there have been other times when I pulled out a file and I didn't realize it was also needed to be associated with all other different files. I'm just trying to figure if it's it's everything we need is going to be in the MRI file, or you're also going to need things in the labels file.
You're going to need some in the label file is where you're going to find the actual annotation.
Okay.
In the MRI file is where you find the labeled volume that you create from that.
Okay.
So in this instance, if we're talking about grabbing the volumes, the volume-based ROIs, just our MRI file, and for processing. Yeah. That should just go along, and then there may be Alfonso. So those files. There's a color table that is associated with it that Alfonso, I think you have it, and if not, I can point to it in SLROIs.
Right. If it's the same lookup table that FreeSurfer use, you don't need to basically enter it itself. But if it's something different, then just enter it as a text file that has the same name as
right. I think that like, ultimately, I think that the way so that labeled volume, the region labels are not built in. So it's not like the annotation files where on the surface you have the regions, the vertices, and that are that region, and an ID for the region or a text label for the region. These are just indices. So just values in that labeled volume. So in order, like at some point in the process, you'll want that color table so that you can.
So for now, then, Alfonso, what I can do is before I send you where everything's located, I'll put the link to the subject folder in the config file, because then you can then from that subject label, everything, the MRI and the labels, those are all the same.
Are going to be relative to that.
Right.
That's fine.
And then we can figure out from there the best way to do it in the future, but that'll be because they are different subject names.
And Jason, do you know if BIT's format specification has a way to specify individual ROIs? Because the way that this would make a little bit more sense would be to basically import them the same way that we are importing functional, anatomical, and like field map information for every individual subject. There might be already a way in BIT's format that we can actually import ROI information for individual subjects, right? And that would probably be the more kosher way to do it if. For the future, if it's already that kind of like way of doing it is already being specified in the BITS format. Do you know if that is the case, Jason?
I don't know, but we can look that up. I can look it up, and yeah.
But yeah, for now, I mean, we'll just point to those folders wherever it is, and then we'll figure out whether it's a way to do that, enter that additional subject level information in a more consistent manner in the same way that we are basically importing every file for every subject, which is just trying to put it into BITS format and then have our pipeline create that automatically for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds great.
Okay. Any other things?
Excuse me, Jason, did you have any questions about the masks?
No, for the mask, we're going to wait. So then, but the other thing I wanted to look at in Matt's data were a couple of different config files that look like they're going to do two different things, but the result is exactly the same. So one was looking at
it was doing like contrasting the novel minus learned illegal sequences, controlling for stuttering severity. One analysis was patient only, and the other one was doing the group comparison.
Yep.
And I think I still have the config files.
I finally saw that was, I hit a button, it went into full screen mode, and I had a thing that said, I started to read it. It was how to get out of it. I was like, I don't want to be in full screen mode, so I hit cancel. I was like, we're already in there. I sure wish I'd read that thing. But and then trying to find, so I got it out, but I think I killed every window I had open. So.
Can you see my?
Oh no, there.
Yes, I see that.
So this was the one for patient only, and then like there were these two different ways of setting up to do the group comparison. Jason thinks that this one is better than this one.
Resolution issues.
But they are not asking the same question, right? I mean, the one in the you shouldn't be getting the same results from the two config files in the top. Basically, the one in the left is looking at there are any difference in the in addition to one, just looking at one particular contrast within subject, basically.
So if we just
baseline.
So can we
sorry,
just
go ahead.
the two that were producing the same are the ones in the background, right?
Oh.
So this one over here is a different one.
Can you?
So those two. So can you just get rid of the one in the
top.
editor? Yeah.
Get rid of this
No. Those two right there, right? Those are the two that were producing the same result. Right.
Correct.
Okay, so let's start with those first. And and try to figure out. So in the top one, what you're trying to do is look for a group difference in that contrast that's right there. And you want to control for severity. So the severity is going to be something that's basically zeros for all the control subjects, but then some centered value, right? Matt, is it centered value for all of the patient subjects?
Right. Okay. So severity has zeros for every control and actual values for every patient. And then group, what was group? I don't recall. It was like one of these created by keywords, or they were numbers.
Is group zeros and ones? Or?
Yeah, you want to look at that.
Yeah, can we look at the participant?
Yeah.
Was it zeros and ones, or was it like control and patients as defined in the TSV file?
I had it set up both ways. Okay, so yeah, like there's one column that's grouped with zeros and ones, and then others was like control patient.
Okay, so the group is zeros and ones, then the one that you're using in data analysis. Okay, cool. And let me look at the configuration files again then.
No,
the group is like
control. Oh no, the group is control and patient. Okay, so it's not the same as control and patient. Okay, so group has ones and twos basically, effectively, for controls and patients. Okay, so that is weird that those would produce the same result. They are nothing alike. I mean, the one on the top is looking at the difference between the two groups in the illegal novel minus illegal learned. And the one in the bottom is looking at the average effect, illegal novel minus illegal learned only in patients, disregarding the control group at all.
But what do you mean that the results are identical, like down to the voxel?
They're identical.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, then
I guess the one
Come and
thing
look at those two
I
results.
know is in this sort of nomenclature, when you have zero for all subjects,
Uh-huh.
one per group, it's not pulling out the patient group accidentally. I know that's not the intent, but
No, it would pull that out if you are actually using a 1-1-0 contrast instead of a 0-1 contrast.
Okay.
It would actually look at that would actually look at the patients. Yeah, the patients.
right, then it would be the same.
0 and 1s, but it would be a 1-1-0 contrast instead of a 0-1-0 contrast. In that, for that particular contrast, it will look at the difference between the two groups, because if you use a 1-0-0 contrast, that will give you. I mean, this is why I prefer to use the controls and patients scores instead of that. But basically, the contrast with these three, basically the all subjects group severity would be 1-0-0 contrast will tell you the effect within controls alone. 1-0 contrast will tell you the difference between controls and patients, and 1-1-0 contrast will tell you the effect in patients alone, which is not terribly intuitive. So I would probably recommend to, instead of doing all subjects group severity, using control patient severity, and then use either a 1-1 when you want to look at the difference, or the 1-0-0-1 when you want to look at the effect within each individual group. But in any way, I just cannot believe. So I need verification, visual verification. Can you please show me that?
Hold on, Alfonso.
Sorry.
Is the fact that the severity is NA instead of like 0?
Oh, the severity is NA. Oh, okay. So that might be actually. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So if the severity is NA, then yes, we have a totally different scenario. If the severity is not a number, then all of those, both analyses are only going to be using the patients within. So no matter what you enter into the design, all of the controls are going to be removed from the analysis because they have missing values. And then if you have all subjects and group for patients has 1s for the group, and all subject has 1 for the group. Oh, okay, that is ugly. That's going to give you like a redundant. Okay, so the first analysis in the top is just an awful way of specifying the design. Sorry, because it makes it particularly complicated. You are entering all subjects when you really don't want to enter all subjects. You are entering the group covariate instead of using the control and patients separate covariates. So yeah, I mean,
can you just go through, modify that to
right? I mean,
best practices way?
Okay, so the best practice way, let's use zeros instead of NORA numbers for all of the severity stuff, so that you can specify which subjects you want to include in the typical way, instead of just having anything that includes a severity score by default, reducing your data to only patients.
So why don't we, do you mind if we just go through and update that one? And I think that your question about, like, we'll get to that, will be a part of it.
Okay.
So if we go back to this one, and Alfonso, do you mind just taking control again? And just
Sure.
updating this one?
So, I mean, the problem is that the severity score has only NORA numbers, but
Right.
let's,
So we gotta go
let's say
into
that
that.
I would want to change that actually originally, just to make everything simpler, basically. But even if we don't do it, I mean, if you don't do it, basically you only have a single group. Basically, as soon as you enter the severity scores, you are only working with one particular group. So kind of like let me see if I can take control of the screen and do the change without actually that. So if you had that case, basically where the severity score are missing values for controls, then you never care about the controls, right? So you could just enter something like this, basically, and have. So all of the subjects going to be now all of the subjects for which you actually have severity score, which is basically the same as patients. So it doesn't make a difference whether I use this or I use all subjects. I'm going to be talking just about patients because the severity score have missing values for control. So those are going to be removed anyway. So it doesn't matter whether here sorry, go ahead.
So let's say that the severity scores were zeros. Is there a difference between this and then patient control severity 100?
Right. So there is a subtle difference, but only subtle. And the difference is that it has to do with the residuals. And when you are entering all of the subjects, even though you are measuring your effect only within patients, the residual error from which you are comparing basically the effect size of your subjects to get a T statistic, it's going to be slightly different because it's estimated across all subjects instead of only across patients. So it's a little bit more robust. So you get exactly the same effect sizes, but get a slightly different statistics because the estimation of the residual error is including also the controls in the model where so if you have this model, basically number one, and then you have a control based on that, and you say, well, controls, I don't care about them. Okay, you don't care about them, but they are still entering into the model, which means that when estimated the residual errors, they are taking into consideration to estimate the standard deviation of the across subjects error term too. And that is the term that the effect sizes are going to be compared to. So if you are seeing like an effect size within patients of, I don't know, 1, which means like a 1% signal change within patients of the difference between the illegal novel and the illegal learn effect. That one number basically to get a T value is divided basically by the residual error. So you compare how big that number is, 1, compared to how much the actual estimation of these effects, the novel minus learn, the residual information that you don't know, basically anything that is not modeled by this across subjects, how much that varies, what is the amount of noise basically in your data. So that standard deviation of the residual error across subjects is basically a way to estimate the amount of noise in your data, so that you can compare that one to a noise level to estimate the significance of your result, right? That's kind of like how this T statistic works. And the estimation of the noise is different whether you do this, in this case, the estimation of the noise includes all subjects, or whether you include just basically a model like this, where the estimation of the noise is only done within patients.
So if at some point in this design, you were also going to compare controls to patients,
Exactly.
If you're doing just one of them, is it best practice then to keep the other one in there for the noise and the residuals, or is it okay to do this?
Typically, yes. I mean, if there is no good reason to think that the residual noise is different across the two groups, then it's best to include them both because that gives you a little bit more sensitivity and it also makes the results a little bit more consistent with whatever analysis you do to compare between groups, because you are effectively kind of like looking always at the same error terms across no matter which particular subject groups you are looking at. So if you're thinking of kind of like mixing the different groups, then it's better to include all of that into a single analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Also, this will have sensitivity, but in some cases, it's not the cases where that is not the case. Is where you have any reason to believe that the residual error is different across the two groups. So, for example, if the variability you think that is going to be much higher across the patients because they are very heterogeneous compared to your controls, which are rather homogeneous, then you might want to do like a subject analysis separately within each group to take into account the different variability across the two groups.
So I may want to do that.
Right, and there are ways to also include that kind of like an equal variance case into the t-test as part of SPM analysis. That is not easily built into the FL pipeline, but it's possible to do basically like as an additional post-hoc analysis where you just take your analysis and modify, relax the assumption and assume the variance to be unequal across the two groups, and you can basically run those analyses manually.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
No problem. And the only difficulty in this particular case is because the missing values are altering which subjects you are actually being entered into analysis. That makes this whole rationale of how to define these models a little bit more complex, right? Because now you are entering control, patients, and severity, and doing something like 0, 1, 0. And that is somehow fine, but all of the controls are going to be removed. So why are you actually entering this model to control them? That it is going to be basically a column of all zeros. So that would still work fine, even in this case, only that is a rather strange way of specifying. And then if you go to this other way of specifying, that is even more complex, right? Because now you are including both, what was this? It was group, I think it was called. Now you're including both groups and looking for the difference between the groups. Like one of the groups is actually being removed from this analysis entirely. So what does the difference between the groups even mean for that case, right? So that's why the missing values for the severity score for this particular analysis are making all of the interpretation of these results much more complex.
But I think Matt wants to change it to zeros. Is that the idea? You want like a control to have a score, even if that's 0.
Right. I think in general it makes much more sense for those type of variables to have zeros, and then decide at the level of when you define your second analysis which particular subjects you're going to enter.
It's meaningful in the right way.
It's not so much that you're giving them a value that has meaning, but you're centering the groups at each group's meaning. It's like how.
And you're also implicitly saying that the subjects are not affected by severity. So by assigning a 0, you're saying that the severity factor, which is affecting your patients by different numbers for every individual subject, is not conceptually affecting the control patients at all. Basically, it's adding a 0 effect to their estimation of the.
So there's no variance in the severity, whereas there is variance in the patient group severity. Yeah.
So sorry, but I have to leave a little bit early today. So can we reschedule for next time and continue this next day? I have to go pick up kids a little bit earlier.
Maybe later this week if people are around.
Yep.
Maybe Tuesday.
Thursday or Friday work. Thursday's
Sounds perfect. I'll be sending probably either today or tomorrow the two things that we discussed about the fix for the mask analysis and the subject specific ROIs. So if you have a little bit of time also to try that out before Friday, that would be fantastic as well.
And
I can run this as is now that these are changed.
But you want to.
We'll update some of the other stuff. And maybe what we can do, Alfonso, you can head out if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can stay.
We can walk through what that would be.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that I think would be you might want to consider doing is unpacking the contrast and seeing what that looks like. Yeah. All right.
But we just have time though before.
Yep. Have fun then. Send me an email if you have any particular questions after your discussion here.
Okay. And we're going to set it. Alfonso, could you do Thursday?
Sure. Let me check. Thursday, it has to be like today. I have to leave at 10:30, basically. So if we can do it 9 to 10:30, that will work perfectly fine for me.
Yeah, that works.
That's fine.
Fine with me.
Great.
Fantastic. Thursday it is then. See you. Well, I'll see you tomorrow also at the other meeting. No, Thursday as well as the other meeting. Okay, so I'll see you Thursday then.
Okay. Thanks, Alfonso. Will I stop recording for this?
Yeah.
There's a lot of downtime in this recording.
Yeah.